Hello everybody, Treno here, and welcome back to another episode in our series looking at Japanese tanks that still need adding to War Thunder. This is part 3, so I'd recommend you watch the previous episodes in this series if you haven't already, where we've looked at the Type 4 Kinu, Type 97 Chini, Type 5 Kiho, and many more. The first tank we're going to be looking at is the Type 2 Kito, which was the last Japanese light tank design of World War II to go into production, which does make its absence from War Thunder a somewhat glaring issue for the Japanese tech tree. The design itself is a modification of the Type 98 Kini, though of course with some improvements over that design. For one, the Type 100 37mm gun has now been replaced with the Type 1 37mm gun, the same one as used on the Type 2 Kami, which gives a much greater muzzle velocity at 800 meters a second, versus 700 meters a second for the previous gun. In practice, this would give the Type 1's APHE shell an in-game penetration of 39mm at 500 meters, or 54mm at 100 meters, versus 32mm at 500 meters or 44mm at 100 meters for the Type 100 gun. As you can see, at longer ranges this isn't a great improvement, but at shorter ranges the penetration figures are 10mm greater, which is not an insignificant upgrade, especially in the lower tiers. In addition to the improved main gun, due to a redesign of the turret, there was now more room for the turret crew, which in theory could increase the Type 2 Kito's reload speed from the 4.3 seconds of the Kini to perhaps 4 seconds, though this is just speculation on my part. The Type 2 Kito would also retain the same 7.7mm coaxial machine gun as used on the Type 98 Kini, which is always handy for against soft-skinned vehicles or the odd enemy aircraft that put themselves in a position to be targeted. The armour of the Type 2 Kito is broadly the same as the Type 98 Kini, especially for the hull, which is the same as the Kini, meaning that the hull would max out at 12mm for the front and sides and 10mm for the rear. The turret should max out at 16mm around the gun mantlet, with the rest of the turret being 12mm thick. But the turret, as mentioned earlier, has been redesigned to be of a more cylindrical design, though it's doubtful whether this would actually make much of a difference with regards to the armour. The top speed of the Kito is 50 km an hour or 31 miles per hour, which is provided by a 150 horsepower diesel engine, and while it is supposed to be the same as the Kini in real life, in game the Kini is about 5 km an hour or 3 miles per hour slower than the Kito. I'm unsure why the discrepancy in speed between these two tanks exists, especially when, like I mentioned, in real life they were both reported to have around the same top speed, which makes sense as only the turret was changed. Though perhaps Gaijin have access to more accurate documents on the speed, and so perhaps the Kito would be the same speed as the Kini in-game. Regardless of whatever top speed is used, the Kito is sure to be a speedy tank on the battlefield, able to quickly manoeuvre across the battlefield in order to line up flanking shots and carry out reconnaissance work, though due to being a tier 1 tank it would be missing the recon module, so instead of marking tanks with your binoculars like you would in later tanks, you would have to use your map to manually mark targets for teammates. Lastly, the crew complement is free, consisting of a driver in the hull, while the gunner and commander are situated within the turret. Ultimately, despite being fully designed by 1942, the Type 2 Kito would not go into production until 1944. This was a problem shared with its predecessor, the Type 98 Kini, which had been ready for production in 1938, but not actually put into production until 1942. By the time the Kito was put into production, Japan had all but lost control of the seas, thus making it almost impossible to ship tanks to its various forces, leading to most of its late war tanks being kept in Japan itself to defend against the Allied invasion. This, combined with the limited utility of the Kito compared to other designs, and Japan's limited resources to produce tanks, led to only 28 or 34 Kitos being produced, with none of them seeing any combat service. So where should the Type 2 Kito go in War Thunder? I would suggest placing it at battle rating 1.0 to 1.3, probably folded with the Type 98 Kini, as it represents a good progression and improvement on that design by offering a much better gun with a potentially faster reload rate. While I would suggest foldering it because while it is a better tank, it's not a drastically better tank, so probably doesn't warrant being added as a tank that needs to be researched to progress down the Japanese tech tree. I can see arguments that Japan doesn't need any more low tier tank designs, but as the Type 2 Keto was a major tank and not just a one-off prototype, I feel it does deserve to have its place in War Thunder, where I think it could have a good role in the lower tiers, and so hopefully we will soon see Japan's final light tank added to War Thunder in the near future. For the next vehicle, we have a self-propelled gun based on the Type 95 Hargo light tank chassis, and that vehicle is the Type 4 Ho2, though I have also seen it referred to as the Type 5 Ho2. The Type 4 Ho2 is armed with the Type 38 12cm howitzer, which was a rather old weapon dating from 1905, and would have been considered obsolete by World War II. Though of course even an old artillery weapon is still capable of causing mass destruction in the right hands, with the Type 38 carrying APHE, HE, shrapnel, smoke and heat shells. Though due to its small size it's unlikely to carry many shells, perhaps forcing the player to focus on carrying just one or two types of shells. As for the shell's penetration characteristics, the heat shell is reported to have a penetration of 140mm, making the Ho2 a threat to even higher tier tanks, but the APHE shell, due to a low muzzle velocity of around 275 to 290 meters a second, is likely to only have around 30 to 40mm of penetration at 500 meters, which is similar to the Type 38 150mm howitzer on the Horo. I haven't found too many details on the Type 38's HE shell, but based off of the 120mm HE shells used on the Rogo EXP, Chiha LG, and Chiha short gun, it would seem that it would likely have an explosive mass of 1.8 to 2.5 kilograms, giving it a penetration of around 25 to 30mm, which isn't great compared to some other HE shells, but could still come in handy against some more lightly armoured vehicles. The Ho2's armour will be extremely light, with the hull maxing out at around 9mm for the front, 12mm for the sides and 10mm for the rear, while the superstructure's thickness is unknown, but it's unlikely to protect against anything but small arms fire and the odd splinter damage, which is not helped by the fact that the superstructure appears to be open from the rear, massively increasing the risk from enemy aircraft or even lightly armed vehicles that are attacking from the rear. The exact top speed of the Ho2 isn't known either, though it's extremely likely that the Ho2 retained the same 120 horsepower diesel engine, and while I can't tell for sure, I think it's safe to say that despite the removal of the turret and some of the upper hull, the new gun and superstructure would have increased the total weight, resulting in the Ho2's max speed being reduced compared to the Type 95 Hargo, which itself has a top speed of 48 km an hour or 30 miles per hour, so the Ho2 might be about 3 km an hour or 5 miles per hour slower than the Hargo, but again that's just speculation on my part. The exact crew complement of the Ho2 is unknown, but based on other vehicles of this type, I would suggest a crew of around 3 to 4, consisting of a driver, gunner, commander and loader, though again like with the other stats that is just speculation on my part, and it's possible that the crew could be even less than what I've speculated. It's unknown how many Ho2s were actually produced, with most sources suggesting it was a one-off design or prototype, while occasionally there is mention of further vehicles being produced. Ultimately, this doesn't seem to have been a great design, though it probably would be more useful than the Type 95 light tank it was converted from, and ultimately it was a good way of getting more use out of the obsolete Type 38 howitzer. But where should the Type 4 Ho2 go in War Thunder? It could potentially go as a premium vehicle, maybe at early tier 2, but if added to the regular tech tree, I would suggest placing it between the Rogo EXP and the Honi 1, probably at around battle rating 2.3, perhaps even being folded with the Rogo EXP. Here it would still be able to have some decent success with its HE and APHE shell, while the heat shell shouldn't be too overpowered at this battle rating, though I could see some arguments being made to increase its battle rating based on the heat shell. Overall, I think the Ho2 could have some success as a small but nimble tank destroyer, quickly traversing the map and hitting enemies where they least expect it, and it would be nice to see this little known tank destroyer given some attention in War Thunder. For the next vehicle, we have a Japanese self-propelled anti-aircraft vehicle, which consists of a Type 98 20mm AA gun mounted on a Type 98 Hoki half-track, which I will refer to as the Hoki SPAA. Armament, as already mentioned, is a single Type 98 20mm gun, which is mounted on the rear of the vehicle, much like on other vehicles of this type. Being only a 20mm gun, it isn't the best suited to anti-vehicle work, but can do a decent enough job, especially in self-defense, as it has a maximum penetration of 35mm at 500 meters or 45mm at 100 meters, which is enough to destroy unwary enemies, though of course any enemies that are aware of you will quickly return fire and destroy you. However, the main disadvantage of the 20mm gun is that it only has a 20 round magazine, which means reloading will be happening quite often and does limit the amount of firepower you can put out, forcing the player to hold fire until they are certain to have a good chance of hitting the enemy. That said, the reload rate is only 3.9 seconds, which while not great is still decently fast, so if these reloads are timed well, this can limit the effects of the small magazine capacity. Armour is understandably non-existent, with the fighting compartment being completely exposed, with only the gun itself providing any cover to the gun crew, while the front of the Hoki SPAA is completely exposed, with only the engine providing any real cover from the front. All of this makes the Hoki SPAA extremely vulnerable to enemy tanks and aircraft, which is admittedly a trait shared by many SPAA vehicles, but it does mean the player will have to play this vehicle cautiously, only revealing their position when a kill is guaranteed, as any enemy return fire is sure to destroy you very quickly. Mobility is a bit of a mixed bag compared to the earlier Type 94 truck-based SPAA, as its top speed of around 48 km an hour or 30 miles per hour is slower than its Type 94 truck-based counterpart, which has a top speed of 60 km an hour or 37 miles per hour. But due to being a half-track, it is likely to have superior off-road mobility, which would make the Hoki SPAA a much better choice for maps that are dominated by cross-country terrain. Lastly, the crew should be about the same as the Type 94, so 3 crew consisting of a driver at the front, while the commander and gunner man the gun on the fighting platform itself. I have seen some sources stating that 15 crew were required for the Hoki half-track itself, but I seriously doubt this is how many men would be required for the SPAA variant, though I could see 1 or 2 extra crew being included to operate the gun, or fill other positions, which would bring the crew up to 4 or potentially even 5. Ultimately, the Hoki SPAA is not a drastic improvement over the truck-based Type 94, instead representing more of a side grade, trading a faster top speed for better cross-country capabilities, while also giving us our first Japanese-built half-track. As for its placement on the Japanese tech tree, I would suggest placing it at around battle rating 1.3, preferably in a folder with the Type 94, giving players the choice on whether they want to put the effort in towards unlocking it, or skipping it for more effective vehicles further down the tree. Overall, the Hoki SPAA is not an essential vehicle, but one I would like to see added nonetheless, and which would be a unique vehicle for the Japanese tech tree. So that's it for this week's episode looking at Japanese tanks. I'd like to hear your opinions on these vehicles, as well as any other suggestions for vehicles you'd like me to cover. I look forward to reading your comments below. Also, in other news, the channel has just passed 1,000 subscribers. So I'd like to say thank you to everyone who watches and subscribes to the channel. It has been great watching the channel grow, and hopefully we will pass many more milestones in the future. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Hopefully you'll join me for future ones. I've been Terreno, and I'll see you next time.